Welcome to beautiful Mountain Lake Resort in Giles County, Virginia. In this video, we'll talk some about the lodge. We'll also talk about a drowning that occurred there in 1921 and how it was solved decades later. And we'll also talk about the lodge's connection to the movie Dirty Dancing, which was filmed there in 1986. And then we'll touch on the mystery of the lake and why it's empty now. The original lodge at Mountain Lake was built in 1851. It was completely made of wood. There weren't even any nails used in the construction. Many years later, when the property was bought by a new owner, he was concerned about the structure being a fire hazard, as back then they didn't use electricity. Everyone used oil lamps, and people were actually drying their bathing suits over the oil lamps. So he had the entire structure torn down and built the new stone structure you see today in 1936. Since their namesake lake has been mostly dried up for almost 2 decades, Mountain Lake Lodge has adapted, and they offer many more terrestrial activities. They have a zip line area. They have lots of beautiful hiking trails, including a loop trail that goes around the lake itself. They put in a skating rink. They have a fantastic restaurant that I've eaten at myself, and let me tell you, the fried green tomatoes are to die for. It's a really beautiful place to visit. The staff that I met there were very friendly, and the grounds are laid out nicely with lots of activities available. In 1986, a low-budget film called Dirty Dancing, starring Patrick Swayze and Jennifer Grey, was filmed at Mountain Lake, and it became the surprise hit of 1987. In this cutscene, you can see Patrick Swayze holding Jennifer Grey up, learning one of the more difficult dance moves, using the lake as a cushion in case she crashed into it, which she did. You can actually see the remnants of the platform Patrick Swayze had to stand on to film that scene in the lake bed. The gazebo where this scene was filmed is still there to this day. In this scene, you can see a pontoon boat off in the distance over Jennifer Grey's left shoulder. In this scene, you can also see the same pontoon boat floating behind the gazebo. While hiking in the lake bed, I actually came upon that pontoon boat laying out on the dry lake bed next to a dock. Over a decade ago, this same pontoon boat was used by scientists and universities to study the dropping lake levels. Next to the gazebo, there's also a memorial of Patrick Swayze, who passed away in 2009. In 1921, a man named Samuel Ira Felder and his family came for a stay at Mountain Lake Lodge. He is pictured here with his wife, Catherine. While at the lodge, C and his family and friends took a rowboat out late one night when C fell overboard. His body was never recovered. 87 years later, a man and his son were looking for artifacts in the dry lake bed when they happened upon this pair of shoes in the mud. They also found what appeared to be human bones. Other artifacts were discovered laying around the bones. This was later determined to be C's body, and they took what remains were found and interned them in a graveyard. Mountain Lake is one of only 2 natural lakes in the entire state of Virginia. Geologists have determined its age to be approximately 6,000 years old. They also determined that this lake naturally drains about every 400 years. Scientists have discovered several drainage holes in the lake bed that open up and allow the water to escape periodically. They eventually expect the lake to fill back up as these holes fill with silt. There are a lot of objects in the lake bed. Along with the pontoon boat we talked about before, there's also a blue paddle boat that's abandoned out there in the grass. There's an old cabin with a dock on the shoreline at the far end of the lake from the lodge. This is an image of that very same cabin in 1968. This is another image today of the same cabin with the dry lake bed behind it. Here is the same view taken in 1968. As we fly down into the mostly dry lake bed, you can see the lake cabin there about in the center of the screen. There is some water in the lake now. It's about 10 feet deep. The deepest part of the lake there is normally 110 to 115 feet deep. As we turn and fly out over the lake bed, you can see the steepness of the bank on both sides. As we head west toward the lodge, you can see that the shallow areas of the lake bed. You can also see the dock there with the pontoon boat we talked about earlier. And as we fly up toward the lodge, you can see where the lake bed becomes much more shallow. You can get a sense for how deep this lake is as we fly over what small amount of water there is in the lake, and then we pan up to see the cabin up on the shoreline, and it's hard to believe that at one point in time the water was all the way up there under that dock. I hope you folks enjoyed this video as much as I did making it. If you get a chance, visit Mountain Lake. It's a very interesting place.